So good morning, everybody. It's Steve Armstrong here from stevearmstrong.ca, and we are launching, I believe this is the fourth session of the Better Leader Inner Circle. And today we're going to talk about communications. In fact, we're going to try not to use the word communications very much in this session. We're going to talk about talking to our people. We have 56 people that have registered for the program. How exciting is that? We started at 11 a few months ago and we keep building. And we only have a small but mighty right now at the beginning of the session, 2 people on live, but they're engaged and they look excited and happy. And we'll get underway with the program here this morning. And we'll just switch over to the view. So the first thing that we're going to speak to this morning is about where it can go wrong with when we're talking to people, our people in particular. And really, there's a number of things that I hope you're not offended by the vernacular, but we don't want to F it up too badly. We know we're all human beings. We're all going to make mistakes. But some of the things we want to try to avoid is we cannot keep our employees in the dark. Maybe we could have got away with it years ago, decades ago. Although I don't necessarily believe that. As some know, I had an Army career of 22 years. And boy, I tell you what, the soldiers knew everything, sometimes even before the officers and the senior NCOs knew what was going on. The soldiers had a sense of what was happening, and they knew when something was wrong or something was happening around them. And so by keeping them in the dark served nobody well. And the other part around communications and talking to our people is we want to, every effort is to ensure that we allow for two-way communications. Even in the military, there was an opportunity for people to speak up and share what's on their mind if time and safety and operations allowed for it. So I think if we can do it, if the military can do it in an ideal setting, then I'm hopefully that we can do it in our organizations wherever we may be. We need to be confident, even if we're unsure of ourselves. I think that we need to express confidence. So our people, we'll speak to this a bit later in the presentation this morning, but if our people don't believe us and don't think that we have confidence in what we're saying, they're going to fall into that trap where they don't trust us and don't trust what we're saying. We're going to speak about modeling good behavior and being a good role model later. I think there's 4 quite interesting questions to test how you're doing with that. We'll speak to that. And if you've been along for the ride for a while, you know I'm a big believer in silence as a powerful communications tool. And we'll talk to that. But we do need to use all of these tools, and depending on the circumstances and depending what's going on. I think if you remember back to one of our earlier sessions around leadership styles and leadership competencies, if you're only using one tool, if only tool you have is a hammer, then everything becomes a nail. So as a professional leader, a manager, communicator, we have to learn how to use everything at our disposal to be able to communicate clearly, concisely, and so that our people begin to trust us. Now, I know there's only a couple people online watching right now, but we have conversation regrets. We all do this. I'm guilty of it just as much as some other folks. Is sometimes, well, notwithstanding making a presentation like this, but often we talk too much. Sometimes we talk because we think that people want to hear what we have to say. Sometimes we talk too much because we don't know what the answer is, so we start prattling on. And so we should really be very economical and very concise with the words and the amount of space we're taking up. If someone comes to you with a proposal or a thought or a question, they don't necessarily need to hear every opinion that you have in your head on that thing. So we really need to manage our conversations in a respectful ways to allow people the space to be able to communicate with us what's on their mind. And we never, I shouldn't say that's not fair, but we often don't ask enough questions. We don't share what's going on and with our communications as well as we hope. We want to make sure that we ask open-ended questions, and some of the simple ones that we can use quite easily. If someone says something to you and you need to buy yourself a bit of time, ask them to rephrase or restate the question using different words so you can understand them better. And often it's interesting, sometimes we have to get to that third question before we really get to what's going on. So a powerful question is, and what else? Someone says something to you or communicates with you, and you respond to them by saying, and what else? It sometimes gets to the underlying issue at hand. I don't know everybody's relationships here, but we've all probably either been in a personal relationship with another person or are in one. And often the simple short answer is ask somebody how they're doing or what's going on, and they say fine. That's often the kiss of death in a relationship, because we need to delve into that a little bit further. It takes a bit of courage, but we need to figure out what's going on with their people. And if your employees and your team members are just responding with simple one-word answers like fine, okay, not much, things are going well, I think that it behooves us to delve in a little bit deeper to make sure that are they truly fine? A lot of us don't take the time to show a little bit of empathy, and that doesn't mean we have to sit there and listen to every word and every conversation and every sentence that somebody says, but we have to show that we care enough that people will actually start speaking to us. So, by blowing somebody off, by not asking good questions, by not listening carefully, we are not being empathetic to that person, and eventually they'll stop coming to us, which is, again, this is quite a sorry, I'm just going to mute. Somebody's on there. I just because it doesn't allow them the space to be able to come and talk to us. Sorry, there's a typo here. It's actually talk over people, not other people. So, if you're talking with somebody and somebody's bringing you a conversation to you, and you don't allow them to finish a sentence, it actually shuts them down, and they will not continue to talk to you, and eventually they won't come to you again. They stop coming to you. So allow people the courtesy, and give them the courtesy to allow them to finish a sentence, and then buy yourself a little bit of space in there. So I often guide and coach people to say, listen, give people a 2 to 3 second space after they finish the sentence. It does a couple of things. One, it allows that person to think that you actually listened to what they had to say. Because if you start answering the questions basically before they get the period out at the end of their sentence, the implication is that you weren't listening to understand, you were just listening to respond, and you didn't really care what they had to say. You had something to get off your chest. If you buy a couple of seconds, it gives you time to respond and think about what you want to say. And it also creates this environment where the words that come out of your mouth then are thoughtful. So one of the interesting neurological stats that I've picked up over the years is that a person can think twice as fast as you can talk. So if somebody's talking, you need to buy yourself space to think about what you're going to respond. So for example, if you were to say to somebody came to you and asked you a question, and you weren't sure about exactly how to respond to that question, buy yourself a couple of seconds at the end of when they've done talking, and then ask them to restate the question. And that buys your mind time to start thinking about a better answer or where you're going to go with this conversation. And then when they're done, and then you can then respond in a better way. And the last conversation regret is speaking before we think. There's that old adage, I grew up in farm country, it's not the only place it's ever been used, but better to keep your mouth shut and allow people to think you a fool than open it up and remove all doubt. So if you want, before you start talking, take the time to think about it. And you don't always have to respond. We'll speak to this in a couple of minutes, but you don't always have to respond. You can actually say, I don't know what the answer is right now, or I need a few minutes, or I need to look into something before I get back to you. So take that risk and that pressure off the table when you're presenting to people. Sorry, when you're talking to people. So some new people coming. So some of the things that we want to do is, I don't know if anyone is comfortable, but I'm going to open up the chat box. And if you want to take a minute, just chat in the box. What regrets do you have? Did you not have the courage to be true when you're answering somebody? Did you ever fire off that flaming email? I know I've done all of those things. And I see Sharon there. She's probably been on the receiving end of one of my torch missilegrams. Have we ever lied to somebody or deceived when we're talking to people? So just take a second and enter into the chat box. What conversation regrets do you have that you wish you could take back? And you don't have to share intimate details, but if you've ever done one of these things, I'd be interested to hear your story. Oh, there's one. So Sharon, to everybody, so she didn't think my truth for long and did what others told me what I should do. I believe that. So yeah, that's an excellent one. You know, we all carry this burden around with us that we need to be able to express ourselves in a healthy and positive way, especially if something's on your mind, because if it's always tamped down, it becomes a festering wound, right? So, and even when you're dealing with employees that are problematic, team members are problematic, that should be given direction, we all often take the least a bumpy road to get to where we want to be. And, somebody like Patrick Lencioni will often, one of his lines is that we will, we need to take that short-term discomfort for long-term success. So especially in conversations. Morgan mentioned that we're not standing my ground when I knew that something could be done in a better way. Yeah, well, a lot of us defer to that. Well, we naturally defer to people with power, but we often defer to people with that subtle, quiet power, like who is the loudest person in the room, or who's been around the longest. Especially if you are on the younger end of the generational spectrum, you sometimes defer to people that maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you should actually speak up. And you know what? Your job is to try to speak up. And if somebody who actually has power chooses not to listen to you, well, at least you've said what's on your mind. So that's pretty interesting, and I know for sure. I once received an email from somebody in the middle of the night who was mad. And guess what? They'd been out drinking with their friends. It was at a conference and they were out that night with their friends. And something I'd said during the day, I can't even remember what it was, but that night they decided they needed to let me know that whatever I said had upset them, and they were in the bag and they fired off this flaming email. And then my instantaneous response was to respond immediately to this email. And I did, which was regrettable. I should have actually waited till morning and took the person aside, because we were all in the same place, and should have taken the person aside in the morning, where I could have had a more civil conversation. But my flaming response to their flaming email set back a relationship a long piece. And I often regret those sort of things. And staying in touch with people. Some of the people on this line, we've been friends for a long time, and we've reconnected over in the past little while, and it's always nice. One of the regrets I had too was I just had a couple old Army buddies. One was out here doing something quite disconnected. I hadn't seen him in 1,000 years. And we connected, and he asked me about another friend. Actually, we were high school friends, and then we all joined the military around the same time. And he asked me to read about this other friend who I'd actually lost touch with over the last 5 years, probably well before COVID. And it just prompted me to, be an adult about this and reach out to my friend Randy, the second person. And coincidentally, he happened to be traveling through Calgary for a wedding in British Columbia in the mountains. A family friend was getting married, and so we were able to reconnect after a long time. So, those things that just rattle in your head. I should do something. I should say something. You should actually go ahead and. Yeah, I see that Diana's comment. My friend tells me I'm too didactic. I get the joke, and but she is an educator and a teacher, so sometimes it's hard when you're in those roles as an educator and a teacher not to be didactic. Your job is to teach and educate people, but when you're a leader, You need to set that aside. And so that's a good line. I think one of the things, and I mentioned this before in a couple other of our sessions, is that you need to understand, not people, that you are the boss, and people will never understand the pressures you're under, the weight that's on your shoulders, nor should they. I have to say that out loud. So when you are busy and working on something really super important, I was working with a client just recently, and they're in the midst of laying off 65 people out of a staff of maybe about 240, I think, due to some funding issues. They're a not-for-profit. And she just needed, the CEO just needed someone to talk to. Because she cannot share what's on her mind necessarily, everything that's on her mind, with her team and her employees. And their people that are being laid off don't really give a crap that she's under that pressure, because they think, well, she's being well paid, and arguably she is, but they need to get on with their lives. They're worried about their dinner plates. They're not worried about the pressure she's under as a CEO. So we need to be able to balance this empathy thing around what's best for our people. What do they need to know? How do we talk to them about all of this without sounding like, oh, you need to understand this is hard on me too. I think there was actually, if you remember the what was that called, the offshore drilling rig that blew up off of New Orleans, maybe 10 or 12 or 15 years ago now, and it was a British Petroleum operation, and the CEO of British Petroleum said, I understand everybody's under a lot of pressure, but I want my life back too. Well, that doesn't fly very well when you're making 11 million a year and somebody just lost their family member in a fire. So we just need to check that piece, so that people don't sound like we're coming off as a bit of a whiner. We want to be nice, and we want to have a positive tone and positive thinking about what we're doing and how we're framing things and talking to our people. But sometimes we just have to do it. Like my friend, the CEO here in town, who had to lay off 65 people, still has to lay off those 65 people. And you can't shine that up any way other than it's a horrible thing to do to people. It's going to be tough on the people that got laid off. It's going to be tough on the people that are left behind. So we have to manage how we communicate these things with our folks, so that they understand that you're being empathetic and that you understand that this is tough. But we still have to make tough decisions and communicate hard, terrible messages to our people. If you've ever had to communicate that someone passed away in a workforce, on a team, or adjacent or close to that team, that's a horrible thing to tell people about, but we still have to do it. And that's the role of us as leaders. So when things are going on around us, we cannot keep our employees in the dark. We just cannot. We can't hide like in the ostrich there with his head in the sand, because in the absence of information, people will make it up. And when they make it up, the story will be a billion times worse than what it really is, because our imaginations will run rampant in absence of good information. And it's getting to be more and more challenging as leaders to stay ahead of that with the tone of social media, and even the mainstream media sometimes can be, there's a whole debate about facts are facts, but sometimes people are not telling us the truth, or they're putting such a spin on it that we have to get around that. So one of the things we have to do is be very upfront and very fast to fill up the void with good communications and explaining to people what's going on, because they're going to make it up. And as I mentioned earlier, we have to understand as leaders is that our people often know what's going on. So for example, if you work in an environment that has a lot of open doors and lots of people moving around the space and the work environment, Often what will happen is when something bad is going on, doors will start to close, or there will be small meetings running around. People won't talk, or people will be walking fast through the building, or they will not be the normal sort of chatty, friendly sort of approach. That message will shoot through the building or through the team as fast as a bullet. And they will know that something, they may not know the details, but they know something's gone wrong. They understand that. So what we have to do is bring everybody in, sit them down, and lay out the situation as best we can, and be balanced as we can be. A number of years ago, here in Joe, where I live in this part of the world is oil country in Canada, and often prices of oil tank, and then layoffs come and whatnot. And I was working with a company, an engineering firm that worked primarily with the oil field and oil field services companies as an engineering firm. And they were laying people off left, right, and center because the work was disappearing, because their clients were starting to shut down their operations because of the price of oil. And people were making up the story that this small engineering firm, was at the time, it was about, well, at the peak, it was about 100 people. Now we were down to about 50. And people had made up the story that this company was going bankrupt. And people were starting to leave because they were afraid of their job was, they were going to get laid off next. And what we worked, I have a communications expert that's on my team that we bring in and we brought it in, and we actually set up a whole lunch and learn meeting with all of the team at town hall. We had them buy some sandwiches and made it nice. And then we opened up the books as best we could. And we showed how much work was in the process of sales process, how much work had been signed up but not started yet, and what was going on with the company. And all of a sudden, the pressure went down in the room, right down to nothing, because people knew that was tough, but they didn't think the company was viable anymore. But what we were able to do is demonstrate that, yeah, the company is viable. Sure, it's going to be tough and it's going to be hard yet, but we were able to set that example. If somebody has a question or comment, I'd encourage you to jump into the chat box and I'll stop. Or if you want to unmute yourself, you can do that too. So some of the things we want to do around two-way communications is that we, like Marshall McLuhan would say, you need a sender and a receiver, and a message and a medium. So if you don't have a sender and a receiver and a way of bouncing back between the two, we have a problem. So two-way communications is the best way to establish ourselves as human beings with empathy. And then we always want to make sure that we're not making promises that we can't keep, especially when times are tough. If people are worried about their jobs because of the economic situation, I think we have to be honest with people and say, look, these are tough times and we may have to make some tough decisions. But don't stop there. That's just that's not the end of the sentence or statement. That's just a period. The next sentence is, we will be as honest and forthright with you as we possibly can, and we will not be making any decisions around layoffs or any other work until the September 15th or whatever the date is picked in the future, so people understand and take them. We need to allow people to talk and ask questions, and we need to listen, to not just to respond, but we need to listen to hear what they're really saying. If you're doing a town hall around a tough conversation, potential layoffs or reorganization, or maybe even it's a successful thing like a growth or a merger or a big contract, what I would suggest is you manage the conversation in the room by allowing everyone to speak, but start with the lowest ranking person, the bottom of the food chain person, to speak first. And if you have somebody there that that speaks a lot and they're loud and they take up a lot of space, just say, look hey, thanks, Bob, for you raising that question, but listen, I really want to get other people's voices on the table, because what can happen is these people that have a lot to say in a short period of time can derail the conversation and often shut down the other people from speaking up. Because as I said earlier, some of these people have a lot of influence and a lot of quiet power in the team, and if they think that person is for or against what's happening, they will just acquiesce and sit back. You really want these people to get into the conversation. If somebody asks a question, listen to it and take that, as I mentioned earlier, take that couple of seconds so you can respond appropriately to their concerns. And if you can't answer the question, then you say, look, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that question. I just can't answer that question right now, but I will be able to answer it. Give them a date and a time frame, and give them a time frame when you get back to them with the response, and then get back to them with that response. Kill rumors. As soon as you hear a rumor, get ahead of it, because it's out there. So let's make sure that if there's rumors going on in your company, in your organization, you get ahead of it and make sure that you tamp down the rumors with facts and honesty and frankness, because that'll just get ahead. Like I said, it'll take off like a shot. There's a Mark Twain quote about a lie will be halfway around the world by the time the truth gets its boots on. So make sure that you stay ahead of that. We need to be confident as leaders, and it's tough sometimes, because sometimes we all have this little voice in the back of our head that's going, nyeh, 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 nyeh. Remember back in grade 8, nyeh, 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 nyeh. This is not happening. But we need to tamp down that voice, because if we're not confident, people will begin to question what's going on. So, you know, the amygdala is at the back of your brain, at the top of your brainstem, and it's the longest, oldest evolutionary part of your brain. And the reason it's there is because it controls our flight, fight, and flee responses to danger. And when we were cave people wandering around hitting each other on the heads with sticks, we're not talking about hockey games now, we're talking about the old days. You know, if we heard a crack in the woods, in the grass as we're going through the savannah, we didn't want to be thinking of, our brain did not need to take the space to think at whether that was or was not a danger or a saber-toothed tiger. We had to assume it was and either get out of there or be prepared to fight. And when people are demonstrating a lack of confidence or trust or fear, that the people around us, their amygdala starts to take over. And it's a very interesting phenomenon what happens yet, because we are not living with saber-toothed tigers anymore. But when the amygdala starts to take over, what happens is your hearing actually starts to focus forward and not be able to pick up what's going on around you, and your peripheral vision narrows down to, so it's looking forward at the danger spot. So now you can't hear, and now can't see what's happening around you, and you are preparing either to fight, flight, go into flight, or freeze in place. And people can't hear the rationality of what's happening, because their brain is taking over, the stress is taking over the brain and creating an environment to protect the person. So we need to demonstrate confidence when we're talking to our folks, so that they hear, so that they understand what's happening is safe, or they can make rational decisions. Because once the amygdala takes over, rationality sort of sets aside, and it takes a lot of discipline to move through that. You know, as a serviceman, I served in the infantry, so we were often in very dangerous, life-threatening situations, but our skill and our training allowed us to manage those things, because we were extraordinarily professional at our jobs, and we were able to manage the amygdala as best as we can. But we're in the same setting, somebody else that wasn't so trained could easily freak out, right? And so I think we just have to be very cautious about the confidence level.
Steve,
Yes.
going back to that one, I'm
Yeah.
curious what your thoughts are on, like, because I do a lot of work in the mental health side, right?
Yes.
And one of the things we talk to some of our leaders about is about also showing vulnerability, but doing it in a way that creates, a more open environment. Like, how do you see the confidence thing and the vulnerability piece together? Just curious.
Well, I think there's a fine line between sharing everything and being vulnerable, right?
Okay.
So I think that's the first thing. So confidence is, you can display confidence and be vulnerable. So for example, So this is quite a long time ago, but my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I don't even remember when. That seems like yesterday, but it wasn't. It was probably in 08 or 09, and I had just taken on a big role as vice president of operations for the Red Cross here in Alberta, and it was sort of a bad time. It was a bad time for on all sorts of fronts, but like to be able to manage this thing going on in my personal life, and then manage moving into this different role at a big company. And there was a lot going on. We were amalgamating 3 regions, district business units into one and whatnot. And so what I shared with people was, hey, listen, this is going on in my life. I just need you to know this. I didn't share all the details and the gory bits and pieces of it. Well, gory is not fair, but all of the intimate bits and pieces. And I said, I just need you to understand that I have a lot going on at home, and it's scary and tough right now. So if I'm disjointed or disconnected, that's why. And this is how you can support me. And I made I shouldn't say this, an error. So maybe retrospect, as I look back, I probably shouldn't. So I need you to bring things to me with solutions, and so we can work through this together. And I'll likely be out of the office more than you hope. So I demonstrated some vulnerability by sharing that information. And then I showed some confidence that I'm still going to be here, and that I have confidence in you to be able to bring things to me to help me understand. As opposed to, I personally don't think it's appropriate for everyone to break into tears at share way too much information. And if you're going through a personal crisis, like I don't know, a divorce or something, one of these big traumas our lives inevitably bump into, I think it's okay to tell people this is what's going on. Or even now, now more than ever, mental health is becoming talkable, audible. Is that right? That's not even a word. You can talk about it. So, if you're struggling, I can remember sharing some things about what I was going through at times, that it was a real struggle for me at this particular time and frame. And this is how you can help me. So it's just not a dump of emotion, right? It's like, okay, this is going on. I want to say this out loud for all sorts of reasons. I think, especially mental health, I think it's appropriate for bosses, leaders to say, I've struggled. I've bumped into these things in my life. I was a soldier. I served in war zones, and I've seen lots of things no human being should ever see. And sometimes it's tough. But at the same time, this is how you can support me. I don't really need you. It's not like, for me personally, I don't like when people want me to share personal stuff, right? But I'm okay. So I'll say, look, I just don't need you to come in and ask me how I'm doing every day. That's hard. But I just need you to understand what's going on at the same time. So I think we all have to play that a little bit by ear, Sharon. What's comfortable for you? What do you want to share? But I don't think it's appropriate to share so much that the burden transfers onto the janitor. They're not getting paid enough to do that, right?
No, I totally agree with that. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, you're very welcome. Yeah,
No,
that
that's
was
great.
a great question. It was a tough one that made me think.
Good.
Yeah, so I think it is cool. I think it is appropriate. And I think if you share, then they will share, right? So, if things are tough, look, I never hid behind it. I like a beer more than anybody, but at one stage in my life, I was a drunk. I drank a lot. I drank hard liquor, and I drank tons of it because for all sorts of reasons. And so when people come, if I share that, then someone might come to me and say, oh, you know what, I have this problem. I need some help. But it's not like I walk around every day with a t-shirt that says, hey, I was a borderline alcoholic. Why don't you come and talk to me about your problems? I think it has to be, what's the word I'm looking for?
I think balance. There has to be balance between the
yeah.
confidence and the vulnerability piece.
Yeah,
right?
that's right. I think there's two sides of the same coin, right?
Yeah.
There's probably more to it than just that. But I do believe that that's what's going on. I think, Sharon, hopefully that was helpful.
No, it was great. Thank you.
So how do we model this when we're communicating to people? And there's when we're talking to people, that's one thing. When we're communicating, there's a whole like can't remember the exact stat, but it's like 80% or more of how we communicate is body language and what we do as opposed to what we say. But if we're modeling good behavior and good leadership and the values that we want in our organization, there's 4 questions you should ask yourself. As number one is, what do I talk about? So if you want to build an organization of excellence, then you should talk about excellence. You shouldn't be telling stories about things that went wrong necessarily all the time. You need to demonstrate the model, the effect that you want to have on people. So you want to talk, if you're moving through a change model into the future, then we need to talk about what the future is going to look like and how we're going to get there. Not about all of the work that has to happen along the way. Yes, of course, we have to acknowledge that it's a truth, but we need to talk about the values and demonstrate that in how we talk. If you want to have a tight team, a healthy team, you shouldn't be coming back to the shop or your office after an executive meeting with the broader organization, bitching and complaining about head office. It's not appropriate. So that's what I mean about what do you talk about? If you always talk about yourself, what do people think? Well, you have a problem. If you talk about the team and what the team has done, and to talk about what we have accomplished, not what I have done. There's that model when something goes wrong, I am responsible, but when something goes well, we are responsible. The other thing is, what do you do? Like, how do you conduct yourself? Do you walk through the office calm and relaxed with your head up and say good morning to people and stop and check in on how their kids are doing? So that demonstrates another lesson to everybody. I remember one time I was still in the service and we were walking across an open area, some grass, I think, and there was some litter laying about. And the major, I think he was a major, doesn't matter. The major was walking beside me and he goes, "Oh, this is getting a little shabby out here. We have to do something." She gets this. My response as a sergeant major was, "Well, don't worry about it, sir. I'll get some soldiers out here this afternoon and we'll get this cleaned up." And he said, "Well, it was just as easy for us to pick it up as do all that." And so we started picking up some litter. And the next thing I know, the next morning I was looking out the window from my office and some other soldiers were starting to pick up litter. They'd seen us do this. We demonstrated what we wanted to do. So I think we often underestimate the impact of our conduct and what we do. Do we roll our eyes? Do we shrug our shoulders? We have to be careful. And what do you defend? So interesting. What a great question, eh? When you're having a conversation, do you defend to the ends of the earth head office because it's head office, or do you defend somebody who is powerless in the organization that you need to step up for? And so that's kind of intriguing sort of aspect of all this. So that when you're talking, are you actually defending the people that you're working with, or are you talking over them and about them? I've spoken to this a few times in past too, is that, we used to run a medical equipment loan program, and it was, a lot of bathing aids and mobility and that kind of stuff for people convalescing or in hospice. And a lot of the jobs that those people were doing was actually pretty, not miserable, that's not fair to them, but it was actually literally wiping the poop off of equipment and scrubbing things and fixing things. And they were the least, at the bottom of the pay scale generally in the organization. And I invested a lot of time talking about how important they were to the organization, how important they were to the mission and what they were doing. To not necessarily defend them, but to demonstrate that these people are important. And when I started talking about them in that way, our customer service rates went through the roof. And other things that were immediately demonstrated about success, because I would defend these people, not the people who were picking on them, but I would stick up for them quite a bit. And the other one is, what do you recognize? Do you spend all of your time acknowledging and recognizing problematic behavior, or do you recognize good behavior? if you demonstrate that you recognize good behavior, people will move to that point. They will start going, oh, look, if I do a good job, I'm going to get a cup of coffee or whatever. But if you're always working with the people that are problematic in your organization, just like our kids, if you have a problematic child in your family and you spend all your time working with the person with the issues and sometimes it's legitimate needs, your other children will start acting up because they see the attention is going over there and I want attention. And it's not quite as simple with adults, but there's an analogy and equivalency there that we have to think about. How are we doing? What was something that you picked? Just jump in the chat line, or you want to jump off and mute? What was something that you picked up this morning that maybe tomorrow morning or Monday that you can implement to help you communicate with others and communicate with team members better? You can either type it in.
I talk better than I write, Steve.
Go ahead, Sharon.
I like the whole who do I defend thing, because that can be a really interesting one. Like when I was with the government, I had to work with municipalities who couldn't stand the government, and the government had barriers for them, unfortunately, just bureaucracy and whatever. So it was like, what do I defend? I can't throw my organization under the bus, right? But I have to be understanding to how they're feeling. So that one is always, I find, a really tricky one and a very interesting one. And sometimes I've completely failed at it.
Yeah. Well, it's like easy to blame, right?
Yeah.
And people hear that. And I was bad too. Like in the Army, I remember somebody saying, well, it's always good to have a headquarters because you have someone to blame. But that's not fair. Like we need to be able to explain before we start to blame. And yeah, government in particular is tough because, well, they don't call it a bureaucracy for nothing, right? It's hard to change. Anybody else have any ideas? Jill, Morgan, Diana, you have something you want to add to the conversation?
I feel like that's I'm an HR manager, so I have a dual purpose of making sure that I advocate for the employees, but I also have to enforce what comes down through management. So that's a continual balancing act. I always say that I'm the queen of difficult conversations.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
My day is filled with them. But I think the thing that I want to work on is, well, we have an employee recognition program, but sort of focusing more on the recognition of the good behavior or modeling the good behaviors or people who do the right thing, even when nobody's watching.
Yeah.
That's sort of what I want to promote more or focus more on.
Yeah. Excellent. Jill, Diana, I see you popping in there.
So one of the things I enjoy very much, and it has been very good that it's registration season again, is because I very much enjoy walking around our school, taking prospective parents and families around and talking about our various staff members. And I like to do it just outside their office so I know that they can hear, but not directly to them. So I'm talking about them to other people and to talk about who they are and what they've accomplished and what they do brilliantly and all those kinds of things and how much I appreciate them. So like I said, that's something I enjoy doing. And it reminds me oftentimes, if there's something that I feel a little upset or concerned about that somebody hasn't done or isn't doing or whatever, then it reminds me that they do almost everything just right.
Yeah.
And not to focus on those negative things.
Excellent. One of the things we have to remind ourselves is, with very few exceptions, nobody wakes up in the morning, walks their dog, puts pants on, walks their dog, has a coffee, has their breakfast, heads out the front door to work with the sole purpose of being a jerk that day. Nobody does that. I shouldn't say nobody. There's the odd, rare person that may fall into that category. Most people want to come and do a good job. Now, maybe they don't want to be the high performer, high potential person to get promoted. Sometimes people just want to come and do a good job and go home and look after their family and their kids. So if you keep that too in your mind when you're talking to people, it's like, how do we understand what's going on with what the problem is here, especially if it's a one-on-one awkward conversation. You know, it took a long time for me to remember that not everybody is as good as I thought I was. And we need to keep that in mind too. So if you go approach it from that way too, then you can start framing these challenging conversations differently. And I agree 100%, Jill, is this whole concept of let's invest in good people. I'm pretty tough on this particular part. I know my wife's a social worker, and so she likes to look at root causes and all this sort of stuff. But quite frankly, if some people in your organization are taking too much energy away that you have to invest on them, you're better off to figure out a way to allow them to move out of the organization and be successful somewhere else, because you are taking your energy away from all of those good people who want to come to work and do as good a job as they possibly can. And I think if you were to do the math on some of these things, I think actually, quite frankly, it's cheaper to write the check, send them on their way. Because if you talk about the amount of energy that's invested in a problematic employee that does not want to or cannot or will not become the employee you need, I think, quite frankly, it's, somebody needs to have a really hard conversation with accounting and the legal department and allow the person to move on. Because I've let people go and they've come back to me afterwards saying, I was so miserable. Thank you for allowing me to move on in my life because I felt trapped there. So anyways. So this chart here, I'm not sure how clear it is for you, but I offer a free organizational health assessment. It's on my website, and I'm happy to share it with anybody that wants it. And it's a 17-question survey. And this is a kind of report that generates out of it. But you will see in this one, this was 200 organizations over the last while who completed the report, and it's based on Patrick Lencioni's Healthy Teams model. And you will see that of all of those people, all 200, on average, nobody had a healthy team, or people needed to work on their healthy team. They had no clarity in their role and their job and what was going on, and they were not very good communicators. So if you are in a situation where this is, you're facing some of these things, it's not uncommon and not unusual. Interestingly enough, the human systems were a little higher, sort of in the middle, and human systems are the, HR and policies and procedures about how you get your work done that are human in scope and scale. But this is not uncommon. So if we were to pull apart the communications part, we've talked about this in past, so just a quick touch on it. So a first team model is built on trust and healthy conflict and holding each other accountable and in order to get results. And the second part of the cycle is, how do you create clarity? And that is around who you are. What are the values? How do you act? What is the most important work to be moving or doing to help the organization? And then the next piece is communicate clarity around all of those things. So as I mentioned, there's the first team model. We'll just stop for a sec so you can see it. So it's all built on trust, this healthy conflict that somebody can, we mentioned earlier, somebody can actually say something out loud that's on their mind and not worry about being ostracized. We gain commitment based on that. We hold each other accountable, and then we get results. So when we communicate clarity, there's 4 steps to this. And one is repetition. So we have to say things way more often than we think. And I was guilty of this as a leader. I have walked away from something saying, well, I've said it. They understand it. It's done. And that's not the case. Seldom is it the case. So we have to repeat our message all the time, especially if it's a values one or a critical one to the organization. We need to be able to say things over and over again so people hear it and and register with them. And it has to be simple messaging. So when you get those community-wide, organizational-wide, company-wide emails that's hitting on 17 points, by the time you've hit the third point, I don't know about you guys, maybe you're better people than me, but by the time I hit the second or third point, I've tuned out. Because it's usually like a whole 3-paragraph explanation of the point. And then by the time I get to the second one, it's like blah, blah, blah. And then it's like, and then I tune out. So we need simple messaging. We need one topic or theme per message. And then we can rely on multiple mediums. Of course, in person is best. Then somewhere along the way is video if you can't get in touch with everybody. Oral is terrific, either through some sort of podcasting model or voice messaging or phone conferencing. Certainly now with Zoom and Teams and all these tools. And then we get to email. And email, to me, when you're having communicating clarity, communicating to people, is more a confirmation than a message. So you deliver your message in a number of ways and you keep it forward. And then you send out the email at the end of the cycle and say, hey, thanks very much for paying attention, and or whatever your language you're going to use. And this is what we talked about. And this is what we agreed to. That email should not necessarily be the primary method of communication. And then things need to cascade. So if you have a big town hall meeting to announce something, and then you should make sure that the next level of managers are communicating the right messages. And then it flows down through cascading messages through the organization. And you as a leader need to get out of your office at a certain point and go out on the shop floor or out on the team floor or go work with people in your organization and probe with open-ended questions about what they heard about the initiative or what's going on. I think you'd be surprised about what you hear back. And then you know that somewhere in the cascade of messaging from top to bottom, that there's a break, something's not working right. It's your job to go check that. Now, the balance on that is you shouldn't be correcting your frontline supervisors or managers or leaders in between you in front of those people, but you can go back then and find out what went wrong and what was said. So I think it's super important on that piece is that, say, for example, you had a town hall today about a new initiative or a change or something, and you put a lot of thought into the communications and the different methods and the repetition of it all, and how you're doing it with the different mediums, and the messages start flowing out. I would say next week or 2 weeks from now, then you should do a walking tour of your facility and just check in with people. Hey, did you hear about the new building we're putting up? Or whatever the initiative. What do you know about that? What do you understand? What do you think? And they'll start telling you stuff that was like, wowzers. That's not what was said at all. Or you can say, okay, yeah, we have some work around communication to it. So I think that's a vital important thing for most people. We as leaders really need to invest in being exceedingly human in our roles. And by that, I mean, we need to be able to build trust. We need to be a little bit humble in our roles and our job. We need to push information out. Do not, as I said earlier, do not allow a vacuum to exist around communications and information. And interesting, I don't know what the stats are right now, but a couple of years ago, there was an interesting stat by the Gallup organization that people did not trust the media and did not trust politicians, but they trusted their CEOs and their organizational leaders. So I'm not talking about stepping into politics here too much in particular, but if there's something going on and people need good information, then it behooves us as leaders to provide credible sites and sources of information. And I think an excellent example of that was the whole COVID vaccine thing. I think if an organization, not to denigrate other information sources from public health or government or whatever. But if you share, you're not asking people to make a decision, you're just sharing information about hey, this is a great site you can check out on what's going on. So I think that helps us build trust. You know, as it says on the picture there, you know, it takes years. If anybody's been in a relationship, you know, all of the brownie points in the world that you build up in your relationship all disappear the moment you make a mistake. It's not like we're going to take 10 away from the 100 you build up. It costs all 100 when you make an error. And building trust in our communications is this thing. We have to manage fear. We spoke about that a little earlier around the amygdala. Fear is inevitable. People will be scared or worried. Maybe fear is too strong, but they certainly will be worried about changes because they've seen change before and they've seen it go badly. And no matter what somebody tells you, interesting side story, I was working with a pipeline company and they were building a new project, and the senior leadership of the company believed with a 100%, well, not actually 93% surety that they would put this project in on time, on budget, and their employees had a 44% believe that they could do it on time, on budget, because they'd seen it happen before. So fear is probably a little strong in that setting, but they were certainly worried that this could hurt their company. If people are afraid and you know what's going on, then acknowledge it. This is a fearful time. We appreciate that, and acknowledge it and try to make people feel safe in their environment. Failure to do this, it's like a contagion. It'll just run through the whole thing. If somebody sees somebody fail, they start to get worried. And again, we need to identify, contain, and overcome the fear. We need to keep our people informed, so we need to tell them where to go, if something as bad is happening, where's good information, who to talk to, if it's the HR team, or if it's your frontline supervisor, or if it's the CEO. Make sure that they understand what they can do if they're worried about something and some big change, what to do about it, and how to be safe. Now, this is more maybe in a crisis. So I know, for example, certainly, I'm not sure, Jill, what's going on in your environment, but you know, some of this flooding in the New England states and this heat dome in the southern states is so bad. So how do we tell people to stay safe? If people expect that they're to be at work and working hard and it's 45 degrees Celsius, and I don't know exactly what that converts for you, Jill, but it's like super hot, maybe 120. If people think that's the expectation, they may put themselves at risk. So we need to keep them safe. Pardon me. Never lie or BS anybody because they know it. So if you don't know what's going on or you don't have an answer for somebody, say you don't have an answer for them. I'm sorry, I do not know the answer to that question. Or alternatively, sometimes we just can't say. And that's okay too. And that's what we say is, I'm sorry, I can't answer that question right now, but I promise to you, I will get an answer to you by whatever date. Make that commitment to people and then get back to them with an answer. So one of the things I always recommended people do in this particular setting is overpromise or underpromise and overdeliver. Say, I will get back to you by the end of next week, a week Friday, which would be whatever the date is, the 29th. And get back to them on Tuesday. Always buy yourself a little extra time in this. And then it always makes you look better that you've been super responsive. And even if you don't have an answer by that time, you get back to them and say, look, it's taken a little bit longer to get the answer. And I'll get back to you as soon as I can. But regardless, I'll get back to you at the end of the following week to let you know what the status of this is. And as soon as I do have an answer, the full answer, I will get it to you. But this is the process taking a bit longer than I originally thought. People generally, well, they're not going to like that, but they appreciate that, and all they want is an answer. So I just got a parking ticket here a little while ago at the university, and it was a mistake on my part. They have a fancy new app, and I was with somebody else, and I tried to register their car on my app, which is available, but I made a mistake. I actually parked my truck, not their car, and we got a ticket. So I sent an email to the university parking. It says right on there, if you got a complaint or worried about this, send it to this email. And they never, and nothing happened. Way past now I went from a $10 ticket to a $40 or $60 ticket, and I never got a response. And so I sent an email to the parking manager saying, hey, I just need an answer. I don't care what it is. If I have to pay it, I'm asking for forgiveness because it was an honest mistake. And by the time I had to get to the vice president of the parking of that department that ran the parking thing, I was mad as hell because they just never answered my question. They never responded. And that's all I wanted. I didn't care what the answer was. I just needed an answer. So I think our people deserve better than us saying, well, I'll get back to them whenever I get back to them. Tell them what's going on. Even if the answer is no, people can live with no, but if there's no answer, then they just get mad. So this is a big one. We need to listen more to understand than to respond. Our natural instinct is to give people answers, but we need to understand what the problem is. So when we're out and about, we need to look just quietly, not spying. I'm not talking about Big Brother watching everybody here, but we need to monitor and listen to what's the conversations that are happening around our workplace. A great example of this was, I don't know how many people camp, but people get inside a tent and they think the walls are 6 foot thick made of concrete and soundproof, and they're not. And I used to walk through the lines of this when we were in under canvas in the army, and I would listen to hear what was going on, what the soldiers were talking about, and I always knew when there was a problem, because they'd be bitching and moaning and groaning to themselves inside the tent, thinking no one could ever hear them, and I could always hear. Now I never caused a repercussion over what they were saying. I always thought, well, okay, something's wrong. They're bitching about the food or whatever it was, so then I could go and address it. People really want to be more conversational in their interactions with you. They want you to be able to listen to them and respond to them as human beings with a little compassion and empathy. So if you are always that person that a boss that takes the high ground and I'm the boss, and I'll just give you an answer. It's like, maybe somebody wants to talk about their kids today or the soccer game that they were in last night or whatever it is. So we need to be a little more conversational. We need to, if you haven't heard the message yet, we need to correct misinformation and rumors, respond to rumors immediately. And we need to understand by listening to understand, then we know what people are starting to looking for. And we can then respond either one-on-one to that person or to the team or the whole organization. We need to get human. The whole point of this is being very human. We need to talk to our team every day. I know we get busy. It's easy to get behind your desk and focused on the thing that we got to do today, but we need to get out and talk to somebody, at least one person every day. Get away from your desk, walk around, or if you're working remote these days, as a lot of us are, then pick up the phone and call somebody and do a check-in and check out with them and see what's going on. And not for any particular reason, just to hear what's happening. When we connect with people, then we need to start thinking about how do we do this. And one of the things we should need to do is, when we're listening and talking to people, is start breaking out things by topic. I mentioned earlier that long diatribe email with 100 subjects, but even our meetings, I think we really need to focus our meetings more by theme or by topic. So if it's HR issues, then have one meeting and deal with the HR things. If it's one topic, let's solve this topic and not do it misservice by saying, okay, we have this complicated problem, we got it on the agenda for 20 minutes and we're going to solve it and move on. That's not appropriate, especially if it's a big thing, an important thing. And again, look for what your people are, listen and look, and always keep your eye open for what your people need from you and need from the organization. We need to operate in a mindset that's, no matter what, something is going, Murphy's Law will take place. If something's going to go wrong, it's going to happen for sure. And we need to be very calm and empathetic and care about people. I think we spoke about this a little bit. If you're wondering what the duck is doing in my office, that's actually my text machine. We need to manage expectations. There's no such thing as a secret, especially, I'm sure, Jill, you appreciate this. There's no such secret as a secret around payroll. If you give somebody a raise and you say, this is between us, don't tell anybody, that'll be out by before coffee break, everyone will know what happened. We as leaders, and I am a living example of this because I'm lucky I'm getting to the stage where I'm not brand new anymore, is that our emotions are our worst enemy. I have a temper that used to flash unbelievable, and all it would do was discredit me, discredit the organization, and really do a disservice to the people that are around me because they were afraid of me. We need to manage our emotions in these conversations. And if you have a temper, then what you have to do is say, hey, how about we take a break? Let's grab a coffee. Let's break this conversation so that you can come back to it fresh and awake and alert and not so hot about the issue. And then we need to repeat. We spent, like I said earlier, repeat ourselves way more than we ever think we should have to. And in our healthy organizations, we need to build this cohesive team, and that's just by talking and bringing people in and communicating with them respectfully. We have to over-communicate and be extraordinarily clear about what we're trying to achieve and our goals are. Never assume that everybody understands what's happening. And the last thing in our communications, and we're talking to people, we need to reinforce the culture we expect. If it's excellent at all costs, which I think is a high standard to set for most organizations in this world, then we need to always be talking about that. And if you see something wrong, then you have to address it right away, because the excellence could be chipped away from you immediately. Trust and vulnerability. We spoke quite a bit about all this sort of things before. One thing about being communicated is stop being efficient about it. Start wondering about how to be more effective. And go slow to speed up. So slow down your tone, slow down your communications. One of the things that we as leaders have to remember is that by the time we've made a decision, we're already in our minds, we're already there. We're already living in this new place, whatever it is. And we forget that all of the people around us weren't part of all of the conversations that got us to making a change or affecting something, or whatever the issue is that we need to slow down. So buy yourself time, step away from the problem or issue. Just because you made a decision generally does not mean that you have to respond instantaneously. So take the time, and by that we can bring our people along in a healthy manner that allows them to move forward in the organization. Like the old Muppet Show, it was hard to hear what was going on all the time. So we need to be extraordinarily clear in how we communicate. We need to reinforce the clarity about why we exist and how do we behave. And our people really, really sincerely in organizations want leadership. Now, they don't want dictatorial or that level of leadership, but we can help them do their jobs by acting with our knowledge and skills and being a supportive boss. We need to be courageous as leaders, but balance that with humbleness and selflessness. And the final one is that we need to do everything we do with purpose and motivation that allows us to step forward going forward. And we're wrapping up towards the end. I'll just leave that date up. That's the next session that we're going to do in the end of August. We made, I think that's, yeah, because of just the way August was. We always said we do this. Oh, I got Wednesday on there. Sorry, Thursday the 17th. I'll send out a note later for that. I would ask anyone here, in this second, certainly a focus on the second half of the presentation this morning, but also on anything. What's the one thing that you're going to do on Monday now? Taken away from today, that's going to make what I don't want you to do, or you shouldn't be doing, is try to fix all of these things all at once. That's hard on the brain. drives busy work and makes things maddening. But I like what Jill, you mentioned earlier about investing more time in the good part of the team, the people that are performing. But what's something that how would you do that? Or either if you haven't picked something that you would do, and what's one step that you would do to make that change starting Monday morning? We'll give you Friday to think about life and maybe get off early, but when you come back to work on Monday, what are you going to do? Morgan, you're very quiet out there. I'm going to pick on you a little bit. And then I'll go to Sharon, then I'm going to go to Diana, and then I'm going to Jill. So I'm going to force a conversation here. Hello, Morgan. How about Diana? Do you want to go ahead, Diana?
Getting there, just had to find the ability to talk.
That I've never known that as a problem from you.
Oh, shut up. Anyways, I think, well, the hard part at the moment is we are, part of our staff is all on break, being summertime. So that is a little bit of a challenge. But I think a piece of it is probably to reassure my staff members who are on site and are putting in time right now over the summer that they are amazing people and that it's very much appreciated and that everything they do has an impact on the futures of kids. And that's why we are there.
Nice.
Yeah.
So it's connected to mission. It's all the right things. Nice job, Diana. I like that. Sharon, you want to go ahead?
I think the thing that stood out the most was that communication thing, like the idea of efficiency versus you know what I'm saying? The effectiveness of it, right? Like,
right.
Yeah. So I'm percolating on that one, I think, for next week, because as you know, I'm embarking on new stuff and I want to really have a good communications plan in my head. And sometimes it's not the amount that you communicate, but it's what, and making sure it's really clear. So yeah, that's what I'm kind of thinking on today.
Oh my, Sharon, I have to tell you a story. So I was I've been in the consulting business for about 10 years now. And I remember about 5 years in, somebody who I knew quite well says, "What do you do?" I almost cried.
No.
I almost cried because I thought, if you don't understand what I do.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and it was because I never was clear about, I am a consultant and educator around to make people better leaders so they can get stuff done. They can accomplish their goals. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah. So interesting being effective. And yeah, sorry. I got a little, you just made me think of that thought and it just resonated with me a little bit there.
I like that story, but also feel sad for you on that story.
Yeah. Jill, do you have anything to add to the conversation?
No, I have to communicate to so many people in so many different ways about a lot of different topics. There's one thing in particular, we have a wellness program that I do, and this is a little early, every March. And it doesn't seem to matter how I try to go about communicating that, what needs to be done with that, people don't know. Or they don't listen, or they just tune it out. I swear nobody opens the emails. So I'm thinking about cascade. Like, how can I cascade that information better so that I have it's coming from different avenues and not just me.
Yeah.
And maybe that will be helpful.
Yeah. Just be a different approach. I'd like to hear how that goes as it go forward. Yeah, if you got, and I'm happy to help too. It's not always that particularly isn't necessarily my forte, but I'm happy to help too if you want to.
All right,
I'll give Morgan another chance to jump in here, but maybe she got tied up or something. But so it's 12:15. I promised everybody 75 minutes, and I'm always amazed when we end up on time and cover all the points. And so thank you all very, very much for the conversation and the vulnerability and the honesty and the discussion. It was good. And thanks for some of you for making me think. I like that part. I like it when you get my brain going too. So I'm just going to stop recording for a second, and you don't have to go anywhere for a minute, and then we can